For this lesson, we're going to concentrate on creating a power-up for our game. So in that, we're going to create a basic entity, and then we're going to take a trigger, and then we're going to connect both of those and kind of house the concept of going into the trigger or maybe hitting the basic entity to allow for a point system to accumulate. And then we'll take that point system and put it onto the screen through a display message. So to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a entity. So I'm going to go down to physics and I'm going to grab a basic entity. I'm going to turn on snapping so I can get them in the same spot. So 1 meter looks good. And we're going to take it, double click, and drop it in. I'm going to next go up to my tools, level editor, level settings, and drive down to the bottom where it says total illumination and turn that on just so I have some ambient fill. The next thing that I want to do is I want to grab a trigger. So scrolling down a little bit, we can notice triggers. I can grab a proximity trigger, and double clicking, I can drop that into the scene as well. So let's go ahead and drag it in. It's a little large for the moment, so I'm going to go to this and reset my view. And pressing the space bar, I'm going to grab the proximity trigger. And I'm going to come down into my dimensions and put it at 2 for each. I can then go ahead and drop it into where the other box is. And now we pretty much have both of these surrounding each other. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the proximity trigger first. Then I'm going to right click and create a flow graph. And I'm going to call this one power up underscore logic. And this is going to be what I house all of my logic in. The next thing I want to do is I want to take my basic entity, let's bring it up just a little bit, and link it directly to the proximity trigger. So I'm dragging outward, and now it's a child of it. So if I move this, you'll notice that it moves with it. So we're going to drop this back down, and we're going to come down in here really quickly, and we're going to turn off the rigid body. So now I have my trigger, and I have my basic entity inside of it. And inside of flowgraph, I need to do a few things. One thing is I need to grab my proximity trigger entity, so we can grab that, and let's add the selected entity. And with the proximity trigger, we're going to first notice or not whether we entered into it. So to do this, I'm going to go to debug, display message, and this is going to print out something and say enter. So on enter, I want to make sure this shows. On start, I'm also going to make sure that I have this enabled. So clicking the debug, we can go back in here. And let's go ahead and jump into our scene. And we can see in the top left that it says enter. I'm also going to come up to audio, and I'm going to turn it all off. So if I jump in, the next thing that I want to do is I want to come into my basic entity and actually change it, because it's hard to see rotation or any influence that we have on a sphere. So I'm going to go to my pyramid and change it to that. And then I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. Let's go ahead and turn off the snapping, and we can drop it in. So with my basic entity, I want to be able to check that it's actually being used, and then once I actually have a hit on it, I can hide. But it needs to come off of the proximity trigger itself. So to do this, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to first run the enter on this and say hide through this, and we'll see if it can hide the basic entity on enter, and this will get rid of the fact that we couldn't walk through it. So if I go through, now we've entered and we've hidden. Likewise, the reason I set this up is because we can actually create something that checks if it's hit through a weapon. So let's go ahead and do this as well. And I'll show you how versatile this can be and how you can actually do stuff. So we have hit on this, and then we're going to register the hit and see if it hides it too. So we jump in, and I shoot, and it hides it too. So or it says enter once I walk through. So you have multiple outcomes directly through that. Now what I want to do is I want to maybe spin the pyramid around. Think of it like coins inside of Mario. So in order to do this, I need to actually grab the entity, which would be the basic entity, and then add a rotation to it. So if we go to movement, and we do rotate entity, and drag that in, and then we want to select our basic entity. So in order to do that, let's go back here and grab this bad boy, and we will assign the selected entity. And what we want to do is on the Z, add some value to it. So we'll add 50. It may be a little big, but we'll see. And then on the top, I want to put it to local space. So now you'll see that it's actually spinning. So imagine that you had a coin model underneath your basic entity. You'd be able to calculate not only the fact that you entered it or you touched it, but you would have that animation that everybody would be attracted to. So now we have some basic logic going on inside of this. And what we want to do is we want to create a prefab out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of it, and then we can go to Level, Prefabs, and we want to create a prefab from this selection. Naturally, it's going to show the level. We can call this one powerups, and we'll call this one basic powerup, and create a new prefab from that. If we were to drag this out, you would notice that we have another prefab here. The luxury of this is that it inherits the exact same qualities as the other one. So if we were to go into it, you would see it moves, or if you shoot that one. So it's not linked in the sense that it has to do exactly what the clone is doing. That's what's really nice about power-ups. So with this, we've nested the flow graph inside of both of those, and now we can go and check game tokens. And the reason I bring this up is because we can check and see if a value has accumulated. And most of this is going to be done through the basic entity. So what we want to do is we want to take it in, and we want to understand if it's been hit or hidden in general. And for this, we can do a game token modify, but we need to set the game token first. So if we go to database view, we can go to game tokens, and we want to add a new item. And so this one's just going to be called logic, and we'll give this one name increment power. And what we want to do is set this to an int value. So an int value means that it's going to take a whole number, and then we can increment or in turn decrement. But in this case, we're going to increment the number and print it out on the screen. So with this set, what we can do is we can actually go into the game token or mission section inside of flowgraph. We want to modify a game token. So once this is hidden, we actually want to trigger the token. And now we can select the token that we just created, which is logic, of an increment of power. And we can do an operation of add, and we can add to the int. So the out value is actually what we're after. But let's go ahead and give a value to it just to make sure. We can do a calculation outside of it. So we can do a math calculate. And we can assure that the hidden part of it is actually incrementing by 1. So the output would be the out value. And we can actually string this into the trigger too. It's just a little bit more cleaner, and you can see exactly what it's doing. The next thing that we want to do is we want to get the game token. So then we can see if it's actually incrementing. Shrink this up so we can get the game token. And we need to trigger this. And what we'll do is we'll right click and go to time. And we'll trigger this every second. We don't want to do it every tick, but every second's fine. And then we can check this token to actually output a display debug message. So the out value we want to show and the message to actually be that. So we're going to remove that. We'll change the font size to maybe 5. And then we'll change the actual positioning so we can see a difference. So now let's see what exactly is on screen. We have 0, which is showing up. If we were to go in and say shoot both of them, now we have 1 and 2. Or if I go in and I collect my coins, you can see that it still has enter on it, but it's also added to the 2. So the last thing that we can do is we can actually check the game token. Now it's not game token check, but we want to just go to game token, and then we can compare to a value. So let me add a few more of these. Go to my database view. We'll bring up the prefabs library. Keep adding more. And now we have 3 up there. So if I compare this to 3 of the token that we set, we can once again take this, and if it's equal to that, we show a message. And that message is going to be success. Let's go ahead and move this. So we'll do 300, do 300 there, and then we'll do 8 as the size of font. And now we've created a nice little prefab library. If we go in here and we were to shoot each one of these, you would see success. So now we've registered and we've stored that variable inside of a prefab. Likewise, I could go and I could run through these and I could get success from that. And you can link that to, say, a key, or you open a door based on collecting all of these items, these basic entities, through a prefab system in your own game.